We're now in our second half of our last day of the Roaring Twenties event. Hello again to our friends online. We are now going into a roundtable discussion about combating COVID vaccine conspiracies and disinformation globally. I'm forgetting who said it yesterday, where we were talking about how small talk these days is very largely about, so which vaccine did you get and do you have any side effects? So I think it's something that affects all of us. It's obviously very prevalent in Africa. You know, a lot of mistrust as to where the vaccine is coming from. Sometimes decisions are not based on science, they're based on emotions and perception. So I think there's a lot to discuss in terms of disinformation and how it affects the rollout of the vaccine campaign. And co-moderating this roundtable discussion with me today is Ioanna. Ioanna, do you want to just introduce yourself, and then we will introduce our speakers?
So, hello from me. I'm Ioanna. I'm a master's student in risk communication in the Aristotle University. And today we're going to discuss about a really trending topic in the last few years after the COVID-19 pandemic, about conspiracy theories. Our group of experts will share their thoughts, their experience, and their views on this topic. COVID-19 pandemic, the last 1 year and more, has changed the situation with conspiracy theories and disinformation. Some examples are China, Russia, and USA, where the lack of communication and information catalyzed the spread of the virus. Also, as it regards the vaccination in Europe, for example, we have programming media publishing articles claiming that a lot of conspiracy theories like the pandemic was a pretext for vaccination. And also countries like US and China were projected as two countries in fight in order to find the best formula. So, we will start with Nika Aleksejeva from Disinformation. She's a disinformation researcher from the DFRLab Latvia. So we also have Dr. Jennifer Cole. She's a lecturer in global health from Royal Holloway University of London, United Kingdom. Saada Hassan, health and research journalist at the Standard Media Group in Kenya. Jancy Jacob, fact-checker, managing editor from Boom Media in India. Esteban Ponce de Leon. He's from the DFRLab in Colombia. Professor Roberto Gelado Marcos from the Syracuse San Pablo University in Spain. Chico, a reporter from Agencia Lupa, Brazil, and Sufehmi, co-founder from Indonesia. So, as you can understand, some of our speakers are online, some are inside, and I want you to share your position and your views about our topic today.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had a great lunch. And now, while you're digesting, we can combine it with some conversation about COVID-19 disinformation, in particular vaccines. I work with disinformation for 5 years, and before it felt that this is somewhere, say, in US or in Ukraine, and finally it reached our Baltic states. I'm based in Riga, Latvia. I'm covering the Baltic states and Russia, Belarus, that region, to see how disinformation evolves. And now I'd say that disinformation is literally affecting lives, health and lives of people in our region, but I'm sure during discussion we'll come to conclusion that it's really a global phenomenon. And I think the key here is that disinformation is not just spreading lies for the sake of fun or for the sake of promoting a product that doesn't do what it says it does. It really is there to undermine fundamental trust, and trust both in political government that is trying to implement solutions to this health problem, COVID-19, but also trust in experts, trust in scientists, medical doctors who are there to help you. And I think this is the key. Also, it communicates, not just kind of spreads these bits of information, but it convinces us emotionally using various rhetorical approaches as simplification. Like, science is difficult, but you explain that vaccine is inserting a chip, and that's it. Basically, some people are really scared by it and are really hesitant to get vaccinated. Also, if the vaccine hesitancy is very comforting for people who are not used to take responsibility for their health, not taking vaccine is easier, because if you take vaccine and you have side effects, or if you convince others to take vaccine and they have side effects, you are responsible. And if you do nothing, then it's fate. You got sick or died from COVID, well, that's just fate. Unfortunately, nature of a person is quite lazy, and this is what disinformation plays with. Also, I think very, very relevant thing is that narratives repeat. It keeps reappearing. For instance, the chip conspiracy, it's still here. We keep quoting it even in, say, our community, and by repeating it, we repeat and make this illusion of accepted truth. Even in our community, we quote it as something mocking, but it sticks. It sticks in our public discourse, and maybe historians will write, well, in 2020s, people believe that vaccines are actually inserting chip and project 5G. Imagine how stupid they were at that point of time, or not. But repetition is very method that disinformation actors are using. And finally, it creates a situation where people can't agree on very common things, and divide and rule approach applies in society and can be used by political actors and also economic actors that benefit on uncertainties. And I think these are the key points, key differences of just a piece of disinformation. That's why it's more of a disinformation effort in larger sense and not just fake news.
Hi, so hello everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me. As mentioned, I'm a lecturer in global health at Royal Holloway University in the UK. My research has largely been in health risk and health risk communication. And I'm also a World Health Organization infodemic manager. And the idea of infodemiology with the World Health Organization is really the volume of information around at the moment is quite difficult for people to process. And so how do we help them process that information? One of the things for me that's very important, and I currently run projects in the UK, in Armenia, in Uganda, and I'm also heavily involved in moderating Reddit forums, is that we talk about disinformation and misinformation. And it's very easy, if you want to find disinformation, to find it. It's there. But if you put it into context, and that's some of what we've been doing with the projects I'm involved in, and look at the percentage of it, it's actually a very tiny percentage of the whole gamut of information that you find on social media. And this has been constant, really, for studies over about 20 years. The real disinformation and the real incorrect information is somewhere between about 2 and 5% of all of the content. And what we've also found is that in forums that are moderated, and particularly where there are voting, so particularly Reddit, where I've worked, where you have upvoting and downvoting, where you have likes and down, and you can unlike something, the community does generally vote the better information to the top, and it generally does vote the worse information to the bottom. So I think sometimes we have to be very careful of looking at social media as kind of a cesspit of disinformation without looking at the advantages it can have as well. Because one advantage it can have, if you look at traditional media and you have a headline and that headline is misleading, you don't have people immediately telling you that it's misleading, how it's misleading, and linking you to better information, which on social media you can have. One of the things that we looked at in my previous work on Ebola was in what ways was misinformation. And there were mainly three main categories, and these aren't mine, these were Gunter Eisenbach, who's editor of the Journal of Medical Internet Research came up with these, that the information is generally incorrect. So to give an example, it may be if you have a headache, somebody tells you to take an antibiotic, there's sort of no use for a headache. It can be biased, so you could take, they say aspirin is great, but paracetamol is rubbish. It's not true, but it's not actually going to do any damage. Or it could be incomplete. They tell you to take an aspirin, but don't tell you what the dose should be or how often you could take it. And all of these can be very quickly countered on social media, and you generally find that actually they are, that people will counter these claims pretty quickly. If something is wrong, they'll tell you it's wrong and they'll tell you the correct answer. If it's biased, they will counter and they will balance that bias. And if it's incomplete, they will generally complete it. I said that what we found and this was pre-COVID, the work I did was on chickenpox, HIV, and offhand I can't remember the third one, I'm very sorry. But we basically found that there was about 5% of information that you could generally say could actually lead to harm if people followed it. And then what you couldn't do is prove whether they followed it or not. And we have done that. And so one of the things we did in the project I'm working in Uganda is we not only asked people if they had concerns about vaccines, we asked them whether or not they had got vaccinated. And what was interesting was that of the people who expressed vaccine concerns, 80% of them did actually go on to be vaccinated. So vaccine concerns and vaccine hesitancy on their own don't necessarily mean that people won't get vaccinated. And that was actually quite an interesting finding. And it was something that we hadn't seen in previous papers, so we deliberately went out of our way to capture that statistic. What we've also found with those concerns, particularly from the Uganda project and also the project in the UK, is that most of the concerns were actually based in logic. They weren't conspiracy theory, they weren't the 5G. They were generally logical concerns such as the vaccine doesn't work against the Delta variant. There are side effects. And actually, if you, rather than kind of banning or excluding these people from the forums, if you address those concerns directly and explain to them, you didn't necessarily need to win them round. What you needed to do is give them more confidence, because actually they weren't against the vaccines. They had low confidence. But we also found that most of those, if you looked at the media, and particularly the traditional media, most of those concerns were being picked up by headlines in the media. The amount of concern about the Delta variant is completely overblown in the media. The amount of impression it gives you of negative side effects is completely overblown in the media. So that one thing, again, that social media could do was put these into context. If people are talking about breakthrough infections with Delta variant, what is the percentage of those within vaccinated individuals? What are the numbers? And so social media, in that sense, can really be a force for good against this. I know that we have kind of limited time each before we actually go into discussion, so I'm going to mention particularly a case study. I'm on the editorial board of a public health journal, which is called the Global Journal of Medicine and Public Health. And we had a paper submitted from a group of doctors in Pakistan, and that was essentially saying, don't vaccinate very elderly and very frail people, because they'll be too weak to survive the side effects of the vaccine and they will die. And so you're wasting vaccines because these people are close to death anyway, and also you're undermining vaccine confidence because anti-vaxxers will see people dying and use this. And I thought, hang on a minute, I don't think this is accurate. And I think most journals at that point would have just rejected the paper, would have been a desk reject. And that was my initial reaction, was a desk reject. What I actually did is I thought, well, why do the doctors think this? Where is this coming from? And so I did some, what we call fake news hunting around news stories about deaths from side effects in vaccines in very elderly and frail people. And what had happened is there had been some reporting on this from Norway and Germany about 3 months prior to the paper being submitted. And that there had been some media reports that in Germany and in Norway, some very elderly people had died after having the vaccine, and the media was attributing it to side effects that the people were too weak to survive. What had subsequently happened is there had been proper medical investigations into that, and it had been proven that it was correlation, not causation. If you give the vaccine to people in their 90s, inevitably, unfortunately, some of those people will just die of old age in the couple of months following the vaccine. That hadn't been picked up and reported in the way that the initial concerns had been. because as we all know with the media, elderly people killed by vaccine side effects is an attention-grabbing headline. Actually, no, that's okay, old people just die of old age isn't an attention-grabbing headline. So these media stories had been picked up in Pakistan months later and had led to real vaccine concern amongst medical professionals in Pakistan. What was interesting to me about that story was that there was no intention at any stage of that to actually cause harm. Okay, sorry. There was no intention within that story to actually cause harm. It was complete misunderstanding. So what we then did is we went back and worked with the authors to explain to them where they'd misunderstood the initial reports, where the better media reports had been, where it had been disproved after. And we actually turned the paper around with them and eventually published it as a paper highlighting the dangers of not following up on media stories to make sure they're accurate, rather than a story of the dangers of vaccinating elderly people. And so I think that's quite a good example of if you turn around sometimes the way that you look at social media and the way that you look at misinformation and think more about where is this coming from, why did it arise, and how can you use the community itself to counter it, we can actually see social media as a force of good. And I sometimes feel in digital forums, and even in kind of global health communication forums, that I'm kind of a lone voice in the darkness, shouting out for the values of social media. But I think we can be very, very quick to see disinformation, to look for disinformation, to find it. And without putting it into proportion of the small proportion of all the information that's out there, we miss the opportunities that social media offers.
Thank you. I totally agree with what's been said before, and I'm just going to talk about some of the research that we've done in Spain about the state of disinformation. As I introduced yesterday, we ran an investigation funded by Facebook and Spanish Foundation, and that was before COVID. And what we found out was that disinformation was more of a widespread phenomenon than we thought. It targeted specific groups, but in general, no one can say that you're not affected potentially by disinformation. And that was a finding that we didn't expect, or not to that extent, and it was very shocking. On the other hand, we did find conditions that could make you more vulnerable to disinformation, like the age group, for instance. Younger people were usually more prone to be affected by disinformation. The more time you use consuming content in the internet, the more likely you were to be affected by disinformation in a number of factors. We also found something that was said here before. The disinformation was more likely to impact you if it agreed with your previous thoughts. So that's what we call the cognitive dissonance, and we stated the cognitive dissonance as well. Why am I saying this? Because we haven't fully studied, or not as thoroughly as you have in the UK, how the landscape with data is in the vaccination process and during the pandemics. But it is also important to know that it's not the pandemics that have created this mistrust towards official sources and the discredit, but that was there before, and the pandemics have only accentuated the process, which has happened at so many other levels as well. One of the things that I agree with what's been said here before is that despite the efforts to introduce this information in the storytelling of the pandemic, the outcome is not dramatic, or at least it's not in Spain. The Eurobarometer quite recently has ranked Spain as the 9th European country in the amount of people who have rejected the vaccination. It's only 6% of people who didn't want to take the vaccine. So that means that the effectiveness is at least questionable. That doesn't mean that there hadn't been efforts towards this information. And there's been a lot of said here with which I agree, so I'm not repeating it, but I just wanted to top it all by saying that the core of media storytelling is talking about exceptional cases. That's what's rare, what's extraordinary. However, this can influence the perception of how frequent something is, and in a situation like a pandemic, this can stand out. So if we're talking of the exceptional death provoked by medicine, the audience can interpret that as a reasonable doubt on whether to get vaccinated or not. So there might be some work to be done there. There's also been in Spain initiatives by the civil society to fight disinformation, partnerships, for instance, between the Agencia, which is the most important Spanish news agency, one of the big 4 or 5 in the world, that created a partnership with colleagues of pharmacists in Spain to solve the questions that people naturally had about that. Another question that can be done is what can be done at an institutional level? And this is something that, more than a statement on my part, it's an honest question that I have, and I would like the members of the panel to discuss about it later on, which is how do we react to these disinforming messages? We have run quite recently an unpublished research on the communication by the World Health Organization proposal of the vaccination process. And one of the things that we found was that there was very little reaction towards the responses that the tweets generated by the WHO had from users that were neglecting the statements. So disinformative messages. And well, the most of your presence here today, I would like to know if that's part of a policy of not replying to disinformative messages, or it's actually that there's so many that it's impossible to respond to them. Because I think that's one part of the debate, one very essential part of the debate. Disinformation is there. Sometimes it's more effective, sometimes it's less effective. There are factors that may make you more or less vulnerable. But what can we do to fight it effectively from especially the institutional side? Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're moving virtually. Saada, Hassan, we'll start with you. Please make sure your mic is on.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this forum. As a journalist here in Kenya, disinformation, misinformation are some of the things that I come across every single day, and my work as a health journalist is to demystify some of the issues that are presented before us. So I don't know if at this point I'm allowed to share my slides. Maybe I can be able to just present a few things on what I had prepared in regards to this session when we talk about disinformation and misinformation.
Okay, time is very limited. Your time is extremely limited. So if it's maybe 2 or 3 slides at most, but
sure, no
time is very, very limited.
Okay, sure. But also, just as I talk about it, is that some of the biggest issues that have been really affecting us is when we talk about our leaders being on the forefront to talk about misinformation and disinformation, because they have, if a lead, for example, does not tell the right information, then that hampers of the efforts that are being made here in the country. So right now we have about 235,000 cases of COVID-19 recorded, and out of this about 2.3 million tests have been conducted. But then this is not the big issue. The big issue is, you see, one of the pictures there is of one of our leaders, former Nairobi governor, and if you can see on the right side, I'm sure that's left side to you, there's a bottle of Hennessy. So in one of his statements, he said that Hennessy can be used to finish COVID-19 or, eradicate COVID-19. So if you find that such leaders are the ones who are propagating false information about COVID-19, how to manage and, mitigate the spread of COVID-19, then this hampers a lot of the efforts that are being done here in the country. And maybe the other slide that I wanted to share is this one. We are not just fighting one thing in this pandemic. It is a global multi-war. We are fighting the virus, we are fighting fake news, we are fighting a lot of things. One of the concerns that I come across every day, or that I've come across, is the people who are bringing about issues about the vaccines, about the virus itself. So one person said the government wants to use us as experiments. So this is false information, first of all. And, how do you convince this person that the vaccines are not here to hurt you, but the vaccines are actually here to protect you. And the other one, maybe the last one, said if you take the vaccine, you will turn out to be a robot. So these are just some of the things that are really hurting the pandemic, or are really hurting the efforts that are being made by our countries to ensure that we manage the COVID-19 here in the country. So far I can say that there's a lot of misinformation, and we are not able to counter all of them, but through our efforts, we are the ones who are going to be able to, ensure that we present the right information, and we stop the false information that is being spread online. Thank you.
Thank you. If we could hear from Jancy Jacob. Saada, had you stopped sharing your screen? I think we can still see something on your screen, I think. I'm not sure whether it's you or whether it's us, Anna. Okay, if you can stop sharing your screen. Thank you very much. Jancy?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. It was very interesting to hear all the other speakers who have spoken before me. My name is Jancy Jacob, and I work for a fact-checking organization based out of India, and we have newsrooms in Myanmar and Bangladesh as well. As far as India is concerned, I just would like to start with some numbers. We have our vaccination program started very slowly. We struggled a lot as far as our vaccination doses are concerned, because there were just not enough vaccination doses, and the Serum Institute, which is one of the largest vaccine providers in the world, they struggled with a lot of manufacturing issues, and they were not able to scale up, and demand was huge. But after all the second phase fiasco that happened, and the government took back the control from all the states, we are right now at around 640 million doses that have been given out. Fully vaccinated, there are about 148 million people have received fully both the doses, and as a percentage of the population, about 11% of the population have been fully vaccinated. But as far as the number goes higher as a percentage, if you look at the adult population who are eligible, that is 18 plus, and about 50% of the adults have received at least one dose. So this is broadly where we are as far as numbers are concerned. Nearly 500,000 people have lost their lives due to the COVID-19 pandemic right from last year. Coming back to our topic here about disinformation and misinformation related to COVID vaccines, it's very interesting. In fact, a few months back, we did a study. We did a study of about 1 year of COVID-19 and what does our story show? Because we focused entirely between March 2020 to roughly about April to May 2021, when the second wave was raging in India. So we decided to do a one year study, and what we found is that during the 1 year study, that we looked at around 350 fact checks. Most of the misinformation, disinformation were around communal issues, lockdown, about whether a certain medicine will work or not, or whether a certain medicine should be given or not, the medicine protocol and all of that. So a large part of the misinformation were related to also the communal divide between the Hindus and the Muslims here in India. But at that point of time, we did not see so much of vaccine disinformation. That is not because that there are no vaccine hesitancy in the country, but purely because we were battling to stay safe and survive at that point of time, and there were no vaccines. So if there are no vaccines, you don't really have any chance of misinformation or disinformation. But from January or February this year, our vaccine program began. And what we found is that in pockets, there are a lot of misinformation that have started. One major reason could be that, the emergency use authorization, which was given to a couple of vaccine players, not enough data was put out, about these vaccines. And there were a lot of concerns that was the government, because they were completely cornered as far as coming out with a vaccine program as soon as possible, where they're giving out authorization to vaccine players without looking at the data much more closely, without looking at the clinical trials data. That I think has caused a lot of misinformation, a lot of vaccine hesitancy, apart from a lot of the political mudslinging that has happened between the government and the opposition players as such as well. But apart from that, all the other things that y'all have mentioned here, whether it's 5G radiation, whether the fact that if you take vaccines, you will get a blood clot and you will die. A lot of cases where people were dying because of heart attack or various other reasons after they have taken a vaccine was also linked to the fact that the vaccines are not safe and it can cause health issues. We have also found that the cancer-causing graphene oxide being present in vaccines, that was also circulating in India. We have also found that a lot of these vaccine misinformation has originated in the US, and from there, because of free transfer of information due to YouTube and all the videos that are circulating, a lot of that misinformation also then starts making a presence felt here in India as well. In fact, Telegram is one of the major platforms that we have found that a lot of homegrown vaccine anti-vaxxers are actually running entire rooms where they are arguing why vaccines in India should not be taken. Apart from this, one local form of the vaccine misinformation that we found, I think in the US, there is a lot of misinformation about aborted, fetuses and the fetal cell lines that are being used, by some of the vaccine players. And many of the conservatives in the US do not want to take vaccines because of that. There's another version of that in India where, there was this misinformation that was going around that cow serums or the calf serums were being serum cell lines were being used. Now the government finally had to come out with a clarification saying that yes, at the initial stage of the vaccines being built, there were these cell lines that were used, but in the subsequent processes, they were completely purified, and what finally comes out as a vaccine which is injected into a person does not have any of the cell lines. So and the reason why this is important for India, because India is a predominantly Hindu country, and the fact that cows and calves they are considered to be religiously important, and they are worshipped here, which is why when this kind of information goes out, it creates a lot of vaccine hesitancy. So but that has now gradually reduced. What we find now is that concerns about the fact that why do you need to take this vaccine if COVID-19 is actually going to be like yet another flu, and that you have to live with it, and the fact that it's not just enough that you've taken one dose, you've taken a second dose, you may have to take a booster dose, then why take vaccines at all? The other reason being that a lot of misinformation due to lack of data, the fact that people are still dying because of COVID-19, and it is being mixed along with the fact that the people who are dying could have taken both the doses, yet they are dying. And this is why the role of fact checkers and data journalists are so important here. We are constantly in touch with the government to put out data on who are the people who are dying in recent times. Are they the people who have taken one dose? Are they the people who have taken 2 doses? Or they are people who have not taken any vaccines at all? Because in India right now, there is still a struggle to get vaccines. It is not as if in many other countries, and some of the Western developed countries, where you can just go out to one of the pharmacies or to any of the centers and say, okay, can you please give me a vaccine? You still have to apply for it, and you have to wait for your date, and then the appointed date and time, and then you have to, after taking the appointment, you have to go and take vaccines. There are walk-in cases as well, but those are all paid. So there are these multiple reasons why vaccine hesitancy is kind of spreading. I wouldn't say that it is large scale. I would rather say that not having enough doses is a bigger problem than the fact that that there are doses available, but people are not taking it because they are worried that either that there is some 5G radiation issue, or the fact that there is a graphene oxide. It can cause cancer. It can cause blood clots, or there can be various other health reasons, or the fact that even after taking a vaccine, you can still die. So the availability of vaccines seems to be the bigger problem. But yes, we do also have a vaccine hesitancy caused due to disinformation.
Thank you, Jancy. Esteban?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm Esteban. I am digital researcher at the DFRLab. I am from Mexico, but currently I am based in Colombia. My work focuses on monitor mainly Spanish language narratives spreading in Latin America, sometimes in United States, specifically those communities that come from Venezuela, Nicaragua, Mexico, but live in the United States. Specifically in the case of COVID-19 and vaccines, I have been tracking this information around, for example, how misleading content is spreading to different platforms and how conspiracy theories gain momentum in other different platforms, rather different than Twitter or Facebook, for example. As mentioned with those speakers that already precede me, is that most of the recurrent topics around vaccines or narratives that target vaccines are based on repetition, just as my colleague Nika mentioned. So, for example, narratives that start in 2020 have re-emerged in 2021 right now. This comes amidst the process, or amidst countries start to get vaccines for all the people. So, for example, in Spain and in Latin American countries, the most common discussed narratives are around DNA modification, side effects around vaccines, even the one about Bill Gates implanting microchips. And this is very interesting one because since January, this narrative didn't spread a lot, but just a few days ago they have a spike on, I think, on August 16 in so many groups in Telegram and, for example, also on Twitter. So this was quite interesting to see that some narrative that you think maybe died in 2020 or at the beginning of 2021 just re-emerged again. So other narratives that target vaccines are also focused on narratives like saying that vaccines are a global experiment in humans. And this is also quite interesting because this narrative is connected to groups spreading narratives around the New World Order, the Great Reset. So it is interesting to see how these specific narratives around vaccines are also connected to other conspiracy theories that before the pandemic were something really interesting to research, right? So something that I would like to focus here is, rather than to mention these narratives, is how they are spreading in social media. So, for example, these narratives, we can see or start monitor these narratives on Twitter, Facebook, and websites, including blogs, for example, that are installed in WordPress or Blogspot. But how actors operate goes beyond traditional platforms. So, for example, some actors and organizations target vaccines have been using other social media alternatives like Parler, Gab, Minds, BitChute, and there are a lot of Telegram chat groups. And this is something really interesting that I would love, for example, to talk with Professor Roberto, because since he's from Spain, I have seen a lot of Telegram chat groups coming from there. That dynamic has been replicated in Latin America as well, so Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, specifically Argentina. In Argentina, it's a very interesting case because they launched a misleading image saying that the government has already the new seats of COVID-19. And if we can detect that image, the image was created in Spanish. And you can see that that image was shared in India, in Europe, and in many other countries that don't speak Spanish. So this is quite interesting to see that that content was created here in Latin America. Just to close my intervention is that I think I would like to close into 2 points. And it is that the increasing use of social media alternatives suggests that actually social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter are generating mechanisms to counter disinformation and to detect misleading content on their platforms, sometimes leading to suspended accounts or content being removed. That's why these kind of actors move to another platform. But this comes to another step that could be in some way kind of dangerous, and is that conspiracy narratives, and let's focus on those targeting the vaccines, for instance, come with narratives about censorship and big tech companies banning the truth to people. And I'm saying that this is kind of dangerous because through these narratives, the ones about censorship are in some way, they can be used in an easier way to target a specific audience in social media. So as conspiracy narratives move faster to other social media alternatives, online dis and misinformation landscape tends to increase in more close groups. And I think this is something that we have been seeing, that right now you cannot only see how disinformation is spread on Facebook, on Twitter, that are more accessible platforms, but you can start seeing how those narratives move to a more close groups that would be more difficult to start monitoring them. So just to end my intervention, sorry, is something that mentioned Nika, that how, for example, COVID-19 have impact directly lives. And in the case of Colombia, they are not only impacting the lives in the sense of the health issue, but rather on how specific social activists that lives in very remote territories that are not the capital in Colombia have been killed because during the pandemic, the lack of protection to social activists decreased. So right now, this is a problem in Colombia. So in this case, for some vulnerable communities in Latin America, COVID-19 impacts civil rights and liberties, including security, social equality, and freedom of speech. And for some communities, 2020 mean a rise in violence. So this is something that I think we will need to focus and start looking at it, because there is a lot of information there that can lead to disinformation, but affecting lives in real lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Esteban. If we could now hear from Chico.
Hi guys, my name is Chico. I'm journalism coordinator at Agencia Lupa in Brazil. First of all, we're going to start with a short background in vaccination in Brazil. Unlike many other countries, the Brazilian population has a lot of trust in vaccines. At least it had before COVID-19. Since the second half of the 20th century, there's been a whole history of strong vaccination campaigns. One of the greatest hits was the eradication of polio, which was really, really quick here in Brazil. And it's been a bipartisan issue. Like, everybody agrees. We had right-wing governments, left-wing governments, and everyone agreed that vaccines should be free, universal, and some vaccines should be mandatory, especially to children. And so the population has always had a very high confidence. You would occasionally meet some people that would be, say, anti-vaxxers, the same. The vast majority of the population would support vaccination, and the proportion of vaccinated people has always been very, very high. So when we get to the pandemic, this scenario sort of changed a bit. Not for the whole run, but at least for a while. In June 2020, the first COVID-19 vaccine started being tested in Brazil. It was the third phase test for CoronaVac from China and AstraZeneca from the UK. These two started being tested in Brazil, and this resulted in, as soon as they got here, there was a huge wave of misinformation, and most of it directed specifically to CoronaVac. They would question, there would be some conspiracy theories, people questioning that they were already being made in 2019 before the pandemic. There would be people saying that there were fetus cells inside the vaccine, and several other, and this had a very, very specific reason. and there was something else. The president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, started bad-mouthing this particular vaccine, saying people shouldn't trust them and saying that vaccination shouldn't be mandatory, and starting to line up his supporters against vaccination in general during this period. There was a sort of specific reason for that, very political reason. This vaccine, coronavirus, besides being Chinese, which is there's a feud between Bolsonaro and China, it was also supported by the governor of São Paulo, who's a political enemy for Bolsonaro. And this started happening in June, and it went all through December 2020. And at the same time, lots of important fake news from everywhere in the world started flooding into Brazil as well. Those same misinformations that we see in other countries, like against mRNA vaccines and this sort of stuff, they started flooding into Brazil. And this meant like a huge drop in confidence. There was a poll showing that 89% of the population wanted to be vaccinated by August, and this share fell to 73 in December, so it was like a huge impact. But then on January 2021, there was like a huge shift on that. Bolsonaro stopped talking, stopped bad-mouthing vaccines, started to stop sharing fake content about coronavirus specifically. And there was a whole change in this whole tendency. There was a reduction on misinformation in general, although some misinfo about coronavirus is still being shared. And the activism against vaccines started to be contained in bubbles. And from December to July, the confidence started to rise again, and now 94% of the Brazilian population wants to be vaccinated. In this period, we made 125 fact checks about vaccines and several explainers as well as projects with scientific and health institutions to talk about vaccines. That's one of the ways we try to fight these waves of anti-vax content. So to conclude, the misinformation campaigns were very successful in Brazil, but only temporary. On the long term, the confidence in vaccines prevail, and so far we have 63% of the population has already taken at least one doses, and the vast majority of the population wants to be vaccinated. So vaccine hesitancy is not a very important problem here right now. Vaccine rollout is actually the big issue, but it has been picking up speed over the last few weeks. But also, it makes us think that if it was able to drop like so fast in 2020, this might change. So we need to be constantly vigilant about misinformation against vaccines, and also long term. The anti-vaxxers are still very few, but now they do have an audience. They do have they're still constantly publishing false studies and all kinds of misinformation. So they are here, and that we need to monitor them for the long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chico. And our last speaker is Harry. Harry, if you could share your experiences and your views.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, speakers, for your very interesting insights. A bit of context in Indonesia. We were hit by a pretty bad anti-vaccine propaganda a few years ago. So we were preparing ourselves for the COVID-19 vaccine hoaxes, and basically we were trying to together with our friends and other institutions, we developed a methodology called 3D: detection, debunking, and dissemination. Thankfully, we have a lot of help from UNICEF, WHO, and CDC. And we develop social media listening, which we are doing weekly. And this is a few steps from this report. This is a timeline showing peaks of conversation and what's causing these peaks. And then we have, we created tagging for the content, and we can see which is being talked about the most, which topic. The words cloud keywords not recognized before, so this is quite helpful as well. We also do sentiment analysis to monitor the people's opinion and sentiments about the topic, COVID-19 and vaccine. This is the volume of questions by channels, demographics of the users of the various social media platform. Geomap analysis shows where are these people talking from due to heavy load of the forms. The users are on where the Indonesia, they tend to see what they're talking about and what concerns and their issues, and that will help. It's another treasure trove. While the general social media platform tend to be neutral in the sentiments, in YouTube it tends to be mostly negative almost all the time, because it's in the comments, people feel that they're free from consequences, so they're talking about whatever. And we can see the peaks caused by what events. And we are tagging the YouTube comments for various topics as well. And these are dynamics. Every week they change. And this report, which we are, this is a weekly report. We feed this report as well to the Indonesian COVID-19 task force and the RCCE team. So it can be helpful for them to prepare the messages for the public. What's the current situation, then what's to be anticipated in the next week, so they can craft a messaging and communication strategy for that. This is the sample of the summary or highlights of that report. The report itself is very long, usually about 60 pages, lots of details, but this is the highlights, so it helps to draw conclusion and highlight potential issues this week and also for the next week. And this is about the detection part. What was not mentioned is also we are utilizing our community on Facebook and others. We have about 90,000 online volunteers. They are also providing us with a lot of information, and a lot of times we got information on hoax content, disinformation content before it went viral, so we can debunk it quickly. So that is very, very helpful. On the debunking as well, we are also utilizing our community to debunk the hoax together. Sometimes we face a very hard to debunk content and hoaxes, but with the help of a lot of manpowers, usually we can resolve that in pretty much little time. So we also have only about 9 full-time fact-checkers, and during this pandemic, we have debunked almost 2,000 hoaxes. So we realized that we are a small organization. We need to amplify our impact by utilizing our community and society and working together with other institutions and coalitions, like the Cek Fakta Coalition. Cek Fakta Coalition is coalitions of 22 online media. They work together, the journalists, to help us debunk the hoaxes. Forums and WhatsApp group with other institutions, National Police, Ministry of Information, Ministry of Health, and others. Expert groups, we have virologists there, epidemiologists, and also other experts. So these are very, very helpful in our effort to debunk hoaxes on COVID-19 and vaccine. And after all that, we need to disseminate the counter narration. We have also a lot of help here from the platforms, Facebook, Google, WhatsApp, YouTube. We have the 3PFC third-party fact-checkers program from Facebook and WhatsApp. And YouTube posted here, Google's COVID-19 dashboard, and so on. And we disseminate the counter narration on multiple channels, our website, forums, chatbots, conventional media, and so on. And of course, our community also helps the dissemination. We provide the contents, and then they are spreading the counter narration to their own circles, communities, friends, and so on. So to that, we are very thankful. At the beginning of the plague, we were practically alone combating the hoaxes, but by the middle of the pandemic, we saw the netizens rising against the hoax actors. So that is very, very good trend. And then when various modern countries were having very low vaccine acceptance level, like Taiwan, or 30% or in so for Salon, we are very thankful to other friends, and also by utilizing the community. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry. Well, I just have one question about all of the speakers, about what should be done differently and what could be the next steps. Who of you would like to take the floor? I would like you to say a few words because we don't have a lot of time, just 1 minute. So, okay. Nika?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it, and I came to the conclusion that the steps forward is strategic communication in a sense that those crucial institutions, like in the case of COVID-19, decision makers are those whose trust is undermined. So if they want to sustain their trust, it's strategic communication, and how it's different from propaganda, it's walking the talk. It's not saying and creating image about yourself, is making sure that your words are followed by your deeds. Second, we need to go away a little bit from this notion of that media literacy and critical thinking will fix everything. No, because it's easy to say, oh, you go and you learn critical thinking and media literacy. Even more because we don't really explain what it means to people. Many think that critical thinking is thinking critically about something, basically criticizing someone. And disinformation actors, they feel very critically thinking about everything, questioning everything, right? So we need to go away just from name-dropping things and go to maybe even countering disinformation with the same tools that disinformators are undermining trust. Basically, deplatforming could be one case. Remember when Trump was deplatformed? It felt that almost QAnon disappeared. Of course, it didn't disappear, but it's much less vocal. So deplatforming could be one of the solutions. And also we need to, because disinformation actors, they are using their faces, they are advocates, they are activists, and well, people trust them because they are kind of rebels. But we need to do more debunking of what's their real incentive. Why are they doing it? Why you probably shouldn't trust them. And finally, we need to do pre-bunking. Science communication should be there before disinformation comes, so there is less space for false narratives. Thank you.
And one from our online speakers would like to add something about what should be done differently in the next steps. Saada?
Yeah, thank you. I would say two things. First of all is what the fact checkers have been doing, they need to continue doing that because they play a big role in ensuring that a lot of wrong information is taken out and, corrected. And also another thing is personal responsibility. That is also what is working right now here in the country. Because when you educate the masses, not all of them will take what you're telling them. But if someone takes it as their own responsibility and initiative to learn that this is right, this is wrong, garlic and use of maybe garlic will not fully ensure that I don't get COVID. These are taking your own initiative to ensure that you don't take in false information. I think those two are really important.
Thank you, Saada. And now we have reached the end, and we can conclude that education, debunking are some ways to fight disinformation, and we have seen that conspiracy theories globally were kind of the same. So, Aurra?
Yes, thank you so much to all the speakers. I really wish we had more time because this is so much to talk about and so many experiences. I'm so sorry for those who weren't able to present or had to cut their presentations incredibly short. Unfortunately, time is not really on our side, but we appreciate you taking your time to join us today. There is a poll currently running on Slido on whether you trust the vaccine that's in your country. If you could just respond, and maybe if we can see the responses as well on the screen, and we get a sense of how everyone, as well as those online, feel free to also submit your vote on Slido. That's sli.do, and the code is 965330, and submit your response, and let's see how generally people are feeling about the vaccine. So speakers, thank you so much for your time. A round of applause, please, for our roundtable. Please clap.